FM was not an invention, it was a discovery. It's from nature. It was all there.
You had it in your imagination. It ended up as the sound palette for a whole new generation that did a completely different thing with it.
I never thought that FM would be part of every dubstep, and I thought, never imagined. And the discovery was a near discovery. That's really important. It wasn't like I was a math major or somebody who knew about technology. I didn't. It was absolutely a near discovery.
Hi, I'm Anthony Marinelli at the famed Institute CCRMA, Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. And this is a marvelous opportunity. We've traveled here this morning on an early flight to meet the great composer John Chowning, who was pretty much the person that discovered FM synthesis, along with a lot of other great things in terms of electronic music, computer music, and acoustics and listening experience. So this is a privilege for me because I've known about John Chowning as a composer when I was in college and heard all about him when I was learning the Synclavier in the early 80s because they used FM synthesis, which was also came over from John, and it was used in the DX7 by Yamaha. So we're going to get into a lot of discovery about why he wanted to investigate electronic music, coming from traditional music, how he found out about FM synthesis, how he discovered it, what motivates somebody to really search for something, and then what he thinks about how it's used today and maybe where it could potentially go in the future and linked with computer music and what you think about, the world today and how we're listening.
Yeah, great. I'm happy to be here and happy to meet you and happy to do this interview. And the big question is, why am I here? And how did I get into this field from a traditional background in music, nothing but music? As a kid, I learned to play violin. This turns out to be important in the discovery of FM. So I knew things like vibrato, and I knew how to create phrases, and from violin, beginning at 8 years old or so, I was asked to play cymbals in the high school band when I was about 13 or 14, and because I could read music, and cymbal players have to be able to read music, so they don't come in at the wrong time, of course. And so I was playing cymbals, watching this snare drummer next to me, and I thought that looks like a lot more fun, and learned to play rudimentary drumming. Not jazz drumming, but rudimentary drumming, like drum and bugle course stuff, really very tightly rigorous, rule-based.
In sync with other drummers, all reading parts, more or less.
They highly synchronized So it's a wonderful thing, and I became passionate about it and learned to be really quite good. At the end of my high school career, that was during the Korean War, people either got drafted or they signed up. So I auditioned for the Navy Music School, which was at that time populated by some really great musicians, because there were a lot of people who chose music, like big band players, rather than being sent to Korea in the Army, because it was all draft then. Cannonball Adderley and his brother.
Nat Adderley.
Yeah, Nat and Cannonball were there. So it was a great environment. I got put into a band, that Fleet band on a Carrier, and I had to, which was a great jazz band. So I had to learn to play trap set really quickly, and did. After the Navy, I went to college on the GI Bill, studied music, composition, then went to Paris and studied with this famous teacher, Nadia Boulanger. During those years, 1959, 1962, I heard a piece by Stockhausen called Kontakte, for 4 channels, surround sound. So what he did actually to get these rotational sounds was he put a loudspeaker in the middle of the table and then 4 microphones. And then he spun the loudspeaker and recorded these rotations. So in the performance and contacto, the sound swirls around.
Like a Leslie.
Yeah.
Hammond organ speaker that spins around.
Right. But this was through quad.
Yes. He was editing tape, music concrete,
Right.
creating tones, sometimes electronic tones, sometimes acoustic recordings, and then performing them, with tape recordings and loudspeakers, which was really cutting edge at the
the time.
No pun intended there.
This was in
with
Cologne.
all that literal cutting with a razor blade.
Right. I thought, I'd really love to be able to write music for loudspeakers as he did, but with rather than just rotations, but kind of freely wandering spatial trajectories. Then I finished my studies with Boulanger, and I came to Stanford on graduate school to study music. There was no interest in electronic music, no facility. I was disappointed because I thought that I might have a chance. I played timpani in the Stanford Orchestra, and next to me was a percussionist, a biologist by training. And she came in one day after hearing my talk about my experience in Paris. She knew about my interest in electronic music. And she gave me this article by Max Matthews, which was the seminal article in the field. That was the first public exposure to the idea of generating music with computers.
Was that Bell Labs?
Bell Labs. He knew all about the sampling theorem because Claude Shannon was one of his colleagues, the communication theory. So this was all substantial stuff, but unknown.
The Nyquist theorem.
Yeah, including the Nyquist theorem.
Right, which is needing like twice the frequency response as the tone that you're trying to recreate in its simplest sense.
That figures in FM too, because it reflected in the Nyquist theorem, anything above the half sampling rate reflects back into the audio band. In FM, it's around 0. We'll get to that.
Good.
I read this article and remembering Stockhausen's experience and all the complications of studios with thousands of cables and plugins, and I knew that that was beyond me. I had no background, and so there was this one diagram with a computer, a digital analog converter, and a loudspeaker. And I thought, if I can learn to program a computer, then I can bypass all that stuff. That's what Max's program presented. So I took a course in computer programming.
Where?
Here.
So there was someone here that could teach that.
Yeah, it was very early in the field.
Very.
And we had the chairman of the computer science department, George Forsyth, who founded the computer science department here.
I see. More of the computer side of things than the music side of things.
Yeah, nothing about music. But I took this course and learned to program in a language called Algol, which was a procedural language and, real coding. I learned a lot, also Fortran. So these were my first coding experience.
With cards?
Yeah.
Fortran, so you had a pre-compiler, compiler, and you were punching cards.
Yeah, so I went to see Max in the summer of 1964, and he gave me this box of cards, and he said, don't drop them because they didn't number
they're in order.
them. Yeah, they didn't number them at that time. And so I came back and in the fall of '64, standing in front of the computer center, wondering how I would ever get this to go, because I knew nothing about computers. Maybe that was the first time I'd ever seen one. I was already 28 years old, I guess, or something. And the tuba player in the orchestra, who was on the other side of me, he was a hacker. Somebody who's really good at programming. And he said, I can help you do that. And he got interested, and he did. So that's when I was able to begin to work on this idea of quadraphonic projections in a 4-channel space.
How many years was that after you were inspired by Stockhausen?
Stockhausen I heard in 61, I think 60, came to Stanford in 62. By 64, so 3 years later, I began the work in spatialization.
So it took 3 years of you poking around and finding the right people. That's pretty quick.
Yeah, and Dave Poole, the guy the tuba player, he taught me everything. He was like my Esterhazy in the German Empire.
Esterhazy. So that's part of the patronage system. If you go into the 1700s, he was it was royalty that would keep musicians like afloat so that they could write pieces for them for their big celebrations. So.
Yeah, but he didn't do it for money. He did it because he was interested in the project.
But he was like your patron, like somebody, enabler.
Yeah, taught me everything. My original experience was at the AI lab at Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. Dave Poole, the tuba player.
Back to Dave Poole.
He got me access to their system.
Back then?
Yeah, at nights.
What year?
Beginning in 64, the very beginning.
There was an AI lab, they called it AI?
Yeah, the first one. Marvin Minsky at MIT and John McCarthy had this conception of artificial intelligence. Stanford, George Forsythe then hired McCarthy to come to Stanford in their newly formed computer science department. And McCarthy then started the AI lab, and Dave Poole got me in at nights so I could work at nights and weekends. And that laboratory was filled with engineers, computer scientists, really bright. It was all DARPA, heavily funded. These guys were the top of their field. There was a psychiatrist, a mathematician, robotics guys, speech guys. All these people could answer my simple questions, and I would ask them over and over, one by one.
Yeah.
The rule was I couldn't go back to the same guy and ask the same question.
What, the unspoken rule?
Yeah, unspoken. I told you that. But I could go to another guy and ask the same question. Finally, I'd get the answer that I understood.
Well, you have to ask the question so many times. I mean, that's like a kid. I learned that, like, how many times do I have to answer this question?
Yeah.
As many times as they need to ask the question, because then you'll have a real understanding of it.
Yeah.
But you were like a kid. I mean, you must have been feeling something bubbling in that room.
Except I was 28.
But when you walked into that room full of those people, right, there's an energy there that wasn't happening in the music part for what you were looking for.
Probably nowhere else on campus.
No, well, you were lucky you were on the right campus because nowhere else on not too many other campuses.
No. So that's where I learned. These were my teachers. I could go during the day and ask questions. I couldn't work during the day, but I could say to them, hey, tell me about the Doppler function, because I need it for my spatialization program. And the guy would sit down and explain how it worked and how to implement it. They watched me, and then I was joined by other students, because they asked me in the department to give a course in what I was doing. Finally, the composition professor joined me, the one who I was working with, who originally had no interest in electronic music. He became interested.
Well, I think he started feeling the current.
Yeah. So then the AI guys were watching us do stuff they never imagined. In the course of looking in the spatialization, I was most interested in the distance cue, which in stereo recording at the time came for free. Everyone knew about angular displacement, azimuth, and because that was really important, the stereo image.
Yeah.
But no one had done any research on how we perceive distance because it was always in the signal. And but I had this sensitivity. I knew that the distance had something to do with reverberation, because Max had given me an experience in the huge anechoic chamber where he asked me to listen for something where I had 8 loudspeakers in a row to determine the source of the sound. They were elevated slightly, so it was either 1 or 8. What I remember is I could not tell how far they were.
Right, and an anechoic chamber is virtually no reflections. That's the environment that he was in when he was hearing this.
So I knew that reverberation was critical. So in searching for this distance cue, I thought, well, our ears are most sensitive to small changes in frequency, so I thought vibrato. And so as a kid, I knew how that worked.
And you knew that you could locate personalities of instruments a lot of times based on their sense of pitch.
Right.
Kind of like speaking Chinese, where it's kind of the same word, but the pitch moves differently, and the human can go, that's different. Subtle differences.
That's right. And, you know, vibrato is an extraordinarily expressive device, as you said. But this was basic, and I thought if I can distinguish the direct signal by small changes in frequency from the reverberant field, because if it's the same, then they all mix together and you can't. So it worked.
Well, also, you're talking about mostly sine waves, right?
Right.
So with sine waves, it's just going to be just filling up the room with hooty sounds that really hard to locate a sine wave because there's no harmonic structure to it. Like, you know, my voice sounds like me because it has a certain harmonic structure, but if everything was just the fundamental, it's like you can't tell the personality of anything.
Right. But as soon as you move one in pitch and not the other, then we hear the difference.
That's the one that's moving. It's over there.
Yeah. So I had a computer. I was doing these experiments using Max's Music 4 program. I thought, well, I'll just change the frequency, make it, and it worked. You know, I could hear the...
On the computer.
Yeah. But then I thought, well, I'm not limited to, you know, just 5 times per second. Or,
right, vibrato is about 5 cycles per second. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Plus or minus a half semitone at most.
And however deep you can go.
Yeah. So I started pushing it, saying, well, I'll try it really fast, then hugely fast. All of a sudden I realized I was hearing a tone that was rich in harmonics.
Yeah.
And I was aware of the fact that at the time to make a tone with 2 oscillators which had lots of harmonics would have taken, you know, as many oscillators as harmonics.
As you need, like you need a giant wavetable, you know, so you could have the fundamental, the first overtone, the second overtone, so you'd have octave, fifth, octave, third, fifth, seventh, all the way up, right? So instead, he's creating all these overtones with just 2 oscillators by fast vibrato, but it's your inquiring mind that just never stops.
Yeah, that's what hit me. I thought, well, this is important, because I transposed it and it was not chaotic. Then Dave Poole, I asked him about it, and he said, well, let's go to the library. We pulled out an engineering text, and when they explain radio engineering FM, they use a sine wave modulated by a sine wave. So in broadcast FM, the carrier frequency is sinusoid, and the modulating signal is the broadcast, the voice, the orchestra, whatever. Then the receiver, our radios, demodulate and get back the modulated signal. But what I was doing was not demodulating. I was using the modulated signal and directly.
You were keeping the messed up sound, which was the combination.
And it explained it all. And it was correct. In 1967, that was, and I showed this to Max Matthews of Bell Labs and Jean-Claude Risset, and then they took down notes. They didn't call it FM because I didn't know what to call it. I just said, Jean-Claude called it scanning or something, scanning, modulating right wave or something. Then a couple years later, I showed it to John Pierce, who was the scientific director at Bell Labs, who coined the term transistor. The four guys who did that work were working under him. And he also did the first communication satellites. First one was Echo and Telstar. A brilliant man. And I explained this to him, and he looked at me and he said, patent it. I played him some beautiful brass tones, and he said, patent it. So I came back to Stanford. This was in '71, and because I had been working on FM since its discovery in '67.
So 6 years of it.
Got a lot of elegant tones.
Did it take a while to get elegant tones?
Sure. It was a lot of work. Discovery, and on the way, you figure out how to make things lively, internal dynamism.
Yeah, because it was probably slower. You didn't just turn a knob and then you can modulate any amount you want. You had to program this with a computer to do it, and then wait, right, for the result.
So I contacted the Office of Technology Licensing here, which had just been formed. And they contacted a bunch of companies like Hammond and Wurlitzer, the obvious ones, but none of them understood digital domain. Then finally they asked a graduate student in the summer to work on this problem, trying to find someone who might be interested in this idea. And they discovered that Yamaha was the biggest instrument manufacturer in the world, but only known in this country for their pianos at the time.
Right.
So they sent up an engineer who had been in North Carolina looking for woods that they use in their pianos or organs or whatever. And he came up and I explained to him in 10 minutes he understood exactly. Because they were already thinking about digital. They were using digital control in analog organs, but all their instruments were sold in Japan or in China, the Far East.
They were trying to crack the home organ market. They had a little bit of it.
Yeah, so he understood exactly. Then they took the license and then asked for a license that gave them exclusive rights to the patent, because in 1971 they knew that the technology would not allow performable instruments but they knew that the development of large-scale integration.
Yeah, the LSIC, they needed processing power, and they needed to be able to, knowing Yamaha, market it and mass produce it.
Right. So in 1983, they produced the DX7.
So from 71 to 83, it wasn't sleeping, but it was...
I was there maybe 10 times, working with their engineers, and they would question me. They wanted to know how I heard what I heard, because I had very good ears at the time. I could make small changes and hear differences, and they learned all that watching me work at their breadboard.
Well, very wise of them to not go through, a decade of trial and error when they can just ask John, who's the inquiring mind, who just never stops. You can just see this, hearing this story. It's the story of FM, but it's also the story of somebody that's an inventor and a creator that has this inquiring mind. You just don't stop until you're still going. You're still discovering things like taking these sounds that you created back then and putting them in more loudspeakers and different environments. And we were speaking earlier about like jettisoning the sound out into like open area, play parks where people can sit down and listen to music and experience it in spaces. It's never ending, right? But Yamaha took this technology and basically put it into I think it's probably the biggest selling electronic keyboard in history.
Well, probably not the keyboard, but that family of the FM engine that they used in all those products.
Yeah,
Like
the DX7 technology was...
and the little ones and the big ones, that was by far the most successful.
Yeah, because it came after the GX1 and the CS80.
The GS1 was released 2 years earlier and was used in Africa by Toto.
Yeah, so was that the first FM
That was the first FM
made by
product
Yamaha?
Made by Yamaha. So
Steve Porcaro.
Yeah, he used it in some flute-like sounds that I worked on in Buena Park with Gary Leuenberger, we were working on the programmer. We have one downstairs.
The GS1?
Yeah,
Great.
and the programmer.
Oh, it has a separate programmer.
Yeah.
Because doesn't it have presets?
The programmer produced a little tape, a little punch tape that you put into the GS1.
I
and
see.
That was the program.
So you can have this as many, well, however much tape you have, right? You have to insert a new tape?
Well, these were separate little tapes, like per voice.
Uh-huh.
Like, so you have a bunch of tapes, okay, I want this one or that one.
It just shows you how far the technology has come, because back then it was like had to be designed and input by the factory, most of the sounds.
One of the things about the DX7 is the cartridge. The cartridge where you could store a bank of voices, send it off to a friend. Next day it's in Singapore. Overnight it ends up in Paris. The fact that you could reproduce exactly from one point to another, plus a little Atari or early Mac connected to a DX7, it became a powerful workstation.
Yeah, I see. That was kind of the beginning of that revolution of being able to share sound that's exactly the same thing.
Yeah. It democratized computer music.
Beginning of it, for sure. It's because it's kind of computer music, but it's not really, because it's a fixed kind of hardware thing, but it used digital computer thinking technology, repeatability. Repeatability,
yeah, which no analog synthesizer ever could do.
Sometimes the interface is what makes it seem hard, because when I fell into FM, I didn't really have any trouble making the sounds that were in my head with FM. And I used the Synclavier. And it was very simple because I didn't have to go through the process you went through. I could use my ear.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it. And I could learn immediately an FM ratio of 1. I can get certain kinds of sounds, and I can just go off of 1 and then back to 1 with the keyboard expression and just get a little bit of skew, like you can kind of overblow a clarinet and get those kinds of things. And I would just listen and then learn what these numbers mean. And then just use the depth. Like, I didn't care about the numbers. I just went by ear. I didn't even look at the displays. And I think a lot of times, like the deep dive menus on the DX7 made it a little bit hard for somebody to get into it. But FM is really quite simple.
Yeah.
It's 2 oscillators.
Yeah.
And then it's the speed and the depth.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you add to that?
The DX7 had these 32 configurations of oscillators.
Of operators.
Operators, basically.
Which is configurations of, there's 6 operators, each is a sine wave, and you can configure them 32 different ways.
And there's one of them which is 4 plus 2. So the one that's 4, like that, this top one modulates, the next one modulates, the next one, finally the carrier. Mm-hmm. It's impossible to predict.
It's crazy.
I mean, it's a thousands and thousands of possible of components. If no one of them have the same number,
right?
In theory, it's millions of numbers, I guess. But people used it. They found things just using their ear, fooling around, and there were some amazing things done. But the DX7 really was, thanks to about 100 really good engineers at Yamaha. The FM that I knew and instructed, told them about how I used it, whatnot, scaling, pitch scaling, all those things were in the DX7. But the keyboard and all the oscillator configurations, that was all their hard work. So I remind when I give a talk that I'm not because I'm often the face of the DX7. DX7, John Chowning. No, DX7 FM underlying technology, yeah.
Well,
but not the instrument itself. That really is Yamaha engineers.
and not to forget that Synclavier came out with FM a couple years before the DX7 was even out. And so, you know, I don't know why you weren't the face of the Synclavier, but I was close with Cameron Jones and Sid Alonso that were developing the Synclavier, and I was learning on the Synclavier, and it was a very simple method of FM. And it came out before the DX7, and they were using your...
Yeah, Yamaha had the license, and I said, because I knew John Appleton.
Okay, John Appleton was the composer in residence at Dartmouth that worked with the two, that worked with Sid Alonso, who was the hardware designer, and Cameron Jones was the software designer. And like just same thing with Moog, there was Herb Deutsch, who was the composer, who was leading these guys. And although Cameron was a musician, you can kind of get carried away with software and having the musician, and the same thing with you. Having you be a musician that's led by his ear and his creativity, working with the software people, it yields a much different result, right? So you were friends with John Appleton, so therefore that must have benefited Synclavier in some way.
I told Yamaha, don't stretch it, try and take their light, you know, they could have sued them or made them pay a lot. Said, please don't, these are colleagues, it's a university environment.
It started out, the Synclavier started out as a Dartmouth College like experiment between a teacher, Sid Alonso, and student Cameron Jones, essentially, came out of the classroom, and John, who wanted to perform electronic music on stage, live. And so the Synclavier was designed to be a live FM instrument that had an eight-track sequencer, kind of like how people would use Ableton Live now. And he can perform, but it was all FM. It wasn't a sampler initially.
No.
So it's right up your alley, really. So you guys essentially, you kept the wolves away from...
I told him, don't...
New England Digital.
It's not to your benefit, and it's really... I explained it's a university environment that comes from, like what you're doing with me. Yamaha's given you something it's never done, an exclusive license.
But they sold a lot of Synclaviers for a while to some big name artists. And it appeared on...
Everyone had one. Well, I mean, the studio musicians.
I mean, well, the composers, it ended up being like over $200,000, which at the time in the 80s was a good amount of money. And they had a customer base of a couple hundred people.
Is that right?
I think that's why it just couldn't keep going. It was too expensive. They pushed the technology so hard. Yamaha was able to, like you said, with LSICs, mass produce it. Synclavier was still making the cards and a lot of hand work done, and then they were trying to sell it to the post-production community and, you know, recording multi-channel, before Pro Tools, you know, multi-channel disc recording, which was, you know, the storage mediums were so expensive back then and so not reliable, you know, Patriot tape, we were recording on tape, these big worm, write once, read memory platters. It was just a lot of cumbersome and expensive storage mediums to do everything they wanted to do. So thankfully...
You're the first person I've ever known who actually had a lot of experience with it.
I still have all those mediums in my storage with, like, started out on tape, you know, cutting tape, doing music on cred at USC in the lab there, and I migrated to the Synclavier in around 1980. That's my experience with computer music, but I still don't know how to code anything or really, I don't use a computer any more than the average person uses it for like calendaring and events and that sort of thing. But it's all by ear, and I learned FM by ear, and I still I can go head to head and make sounds that I can make on an analog synthesizer with FM. Because it's just through experience, but a good interface. And the Synclavier was a really good interface. Where you didn't have to look at numbers and you get an immediate result. But you really, you created it. I mean, I know you're calling it
discovery.
A discovery. But to me, there's a lot to calling something a discovery when you're the one that did it. It was a lot of steps. It wasn't just like, there's oil, now let's dig. You know, you step by step had to like learn why this is relevant, and then what are we going to do with it, and what kind of sounds can I make, and then now I need to get faster at it, because to make music, I think you need a certain level of spontaneity, response back from it, to be let's say to create an instrument, because an instrument you want to be a player and you want to emit something spontaneously and get something back fairly quickly, like when you played violin. You don't want to wiggle your finger and then wait 5 minutes.
No, right. Which is what we had to do in those days.
With the computer.
Yeah, like the Discovery, each of those little 2-second samples, I had to wait sometimes as much as an hour.
An hour. And you got 2 seconds back, and then you'd say, I kind of like it.
Yeah.
Let's try again.
Hour would be extreme, because I did it all at night when it was a timeshare system, so the fewer the users, then the faster response. But still, all the time you're waiting, I'm thinking, what ifs?
Yeah.
If this, then I'll do that.
How amazing.
Yeah.
But you're using the time.
Yeah. Thinking all the time, because the cost of a mistake is so great.
Is it panning out the way you thought it would? Like,
I don't know. I never thought that FM would like be part of every like dubstep, and I thought, never imagined. My world was not pop music. My world was, like new music. I was interested in Lee Getty's music and the Boulez to some extent. Lee Getty had the best years of the whole group, I think.
You can hear his music in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
most famous for the choral pieces when you see the big monolith.
Lux Aeterna for 16 voices. He called it micropolyphony. While all the other composers, it was like, extreme intervals.
Yeah.
But Lee Getty's was very ear-based, small changes.
Well, you like Stockhausen, so it's like Klangfarben melody, right? So
some of it.
Some of it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you also like music that the timbre, because that's FM, where the rich timbral changes that occur, and you can enjoy the timbre change. You just don't always have to change notes like you were describing.
Right.
And so,
yeah, that's not so interesting. Timbre was the most important musical parameter for me with the digital domain, is the sound itself.
The sound itself, even though you could have immediately created note sequences that were
that's
impossible.
what they were doing at Princeton.
They were creating note sequences at like ridiculous speeds. Milton Babbitt.
The big RCA synthesizer, he was doing notes. And,
Pauline Oliveros was a lot of notes.
She was later the guy at University of Illinois, Hiller. He did the Iliac Suite. That was all music for performers, or music in case of Babbitt, which was the 12-tone series, his idea of his conception.
Well, they were coming from traditional music, and that was kind of the next way, like how can we do, not repeated 12-tone situation that the player couldn't play.
And that didn't interest me at all. My interest was timbre.
But you're saying that, but like it didn't exist. You had to find it. You found it. That was your discovery.
Yeah.
So that you had it in your imagination, and you made it into reality, and then it ended up in dubstep. It ended up as the sound palette for a whole new generation that did a completely different thing with it. But to me, that's quite remarkable, because it's very versatile.
Yeah.
I don't think it's reached its potential yet, because the controllers have made it too difficult for people to feel comfortable manipulating it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know much about the controllers except at Max MSP, and that one's hard. It's too far from the sources. I like representations of FM that are close to Synclavier or Max's original. Max's original block diagram for making music is an oscillator. Its output, a little line, connects to an oscillator, to its carrier, to its frequency. Another one connects to its amplitude, which is the modulator. That's Max MSP, and that's Max's original graphic representation in his conception of how this works. And I like things that keep close to that extend original conceptions, so we make contact with the past, which has enriched us so. And Max MSP is the language. You got to learn it. It's so beautiful.
I'm really touched by that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still on pencil and paper, you know, and I think there's a lot there for me, you know.
Yeah.
I'm ready. I want to take a good look at it and feel it. But I can tell you the Synclavier architecture, it's just it's two oscillators. There's 4 partial timbres, but it's not 4 deep.
No.
It's just, you mix them.
Yeah.
So you have 4 and you mix them, and it keeps it very simple. And I feel like I can, like you said, it becomes like there's too many permutations to follow, and that's fun to have as an algorithm. But the basic is kind of, to me, where the music lives, you know.
The way I use this FM is 2 carriers and 1 modulator. It's my basic unit. And then the complexity is by adding bunches of those. So it's your idea of 2 oscillators, and complexity is by putting a lot of those together, different.
So just 1 modulator, so then the carriers you can have they can be whatever.
Well, if you have
octaves.
2 carriers, you can create resonances, simulation of resonances, like.
Oh, more vocal tones.
Like, got these kinds of sounds.
Right.
So you have 1 carrier as is the pitch frequency, the other one a multiple of the pre-pitch frequency. So if you want a resonance around 7th harmonic, then you make that carrier 7 times the pitch frequency.
With a separate envelope.
Yeah, with separate envelope.
You have to, otherwise it would be like an organ.
And the modulator is the same for both. The modulator is always the pitch frequency. So that's my basic unit. And complexity then is just multiple.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, because by limiting, you can, like, then you can work with it. It's like starting with an orchestra. It's like, okay, there's a violin, and then, I know how to do things to go off the rails and play the violin in all these different parts, col legno, sol tasto, you know, going crazy and creating side bands with them beating against each other and all that. But I still, like, there's a core that you want to come home to as the listener of your own music too. Like, there's not just the listener out there, to follow your own flow. And so I like what you're saying. Like, it shows me a lot that you, who can have all this unlimited amount of possibilities, you still come home to something and you build from there.
Yeah.
So you can go off on it, and then you still come back, so that there's like something, like a through line to follow that makes it, because you're a composer at heart.
That's all my motivation. FM was not an invention, it was a discovery. It's from nature. It was all there. It's all, you know, Bessel functions, which are involved in understanding it, not in producing the sounds. All that's from 19th century physicists.
Sure. But you were a musician that was inspired by a certain piece of music.
Yeah, and the discovery was a near discovery. That's really important. It wasn't like I was a math major or somebody who knew about technology. I didn't. It was absolutely a ear discovery.
Yeah, you wanted to locate sound, right? And hear where it's coming from, and you realized that.
And I heard what was happening as I made these changes.
With just basically faster vibrati, vibrato, at different depths.
Depths and speeds.
Depths and speeds, and then we can talk also about FM ratio, right? Which is kind of related to the speed, but it's the speed specific to the ratio of the modulation frequency in relationship to the main signal that you have. So if you're modulating with something that's at the same frequency, you get a lot more predictable tonality, like it's something that you're more familiar with, where it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So that'd be an FM ratio of 1. But as you get into other FM ratios, you start to pick up harmonics, like FM ratio of 2 might sound more like square waves in analog synthesis because you get a little more of the odd overtones and so forth. And then you can start, I'm sure you got into like the clangy ones, right?
Oh, well, if the rule is if it's a ratio that is a whole number, it's going to be harmonic. And if it's not fractional, it's going to be inharmonic, clangorous, or inharmonic spectra. So the partials are not in the harmonic series, but they're based upon the ratio. And it's misunderstood. Max MSP, this program that many of us use, has this idea called harmonicity factor. Harmonicity factor is from Dick Moore, who got his PhD here and ended up at UCSD. He had this idea and promoted it, which was if you have a ratio which is a whole number, it's going to be harmonic. And if it's not a whole number, then it's inharmonic. Well, that's not true at all.
No.
If you have a ratio that's, say, carrier modulating frequency of 4 to 1, if you have energy at the fourth harmonic, third, second, fifth, sixth, and seventh, depending on the index, so they're harmonic. So it was completely misleading and forever confusing to everyone.
Yeah, I think people are confused for a lot of reasons. I mean, I like 1.5, and it's not a whole number.
No, that's
and
right.
it works great.
Yeah.
And so does 1.667, 1.666.
1.5 is like 3 to 2.
Now we're at the point where we have like repeatability, and we're trying to put aleatoric things back into it, which is just not just chance things, like that term is used sometimes for chance, but anomalies, distortions, which are good, right? That give you surprises.
Which is where I spend most of my time.
So trying to surprise yourself?
Well, these small changes that make things live. I have always used natural sounds as a target. Like, I'm going to try and synthesize a brass tone.
Yeah.
Because then you know when you succeed.
Right, there's a reference.
But on the way, you learn a heck of a lot. Like I did synthesize singing voices, female singing voices, which were good enough that Boulez didn't know that they were synthesized. He thought my examples were recorded. They were that good.
Using like 3
FM.
carriers and a modulator?
Yeah.
Your standard?
In that case, two carriers and a modulator. One for the bass guy who synthesized the basso, I used 3 carriers and a modulator. But all the time was in the fine detail, like how to get the pitch to rise during the attack portion, and the amount of random and mix of random and periodic vibrato.
But you must still have some overall vibrato that you can add to it, right? Because if you have
Always.
you have to. Because then the whole thing has to move back to normal vibrato. Like,
unless it's a singer singing a tone with no vibrato. But there still has to be a small amount of random vibrato.
Well,
But not just any random vibrato. Because a singer is always correcting.
Right.
If it's a little off,
Isn't that it? But see, that's why you like to live there, because that's, I think, where the beauty lies in the human emotion. It's just in the stuff you just kind of don't think about too much. But if it's not there, we all notice it. We all notice if it's just a static electronic tone that doesn't do anything.
In about 20 milliseconds, you can say this.
We're done with it.
Yeah.
It's fatiguing.
Yeah.
And it's like the funny thing is that the non-fatiguing thing is the thing that's like correcting itself.
Yeah.
So ironic. That's the joy of this stuff, these anomalies. So like, that was what I did when I started trying to learn analog synthesis. I recorded the LA Philharmonic individuals, just like in backstage. I got access backstage on my little cassette recorder, and I would get a snippet of a bassoon and a snippet of, the different strings, viola, cello, whatever. And they would play a figure, like probably like a famous excerpt, like you would have like in music school, you'd learn for score reading the excerpt from the bassoon from some famous opera or whatever. So they'd play these excerpts, and I'd come home and run the cassette player in the same speakers on my ARP 2600 as I was making the sound. So I was at a fair advantage, the same speaker, left speaker, right speaker. But the journey was exactly what you said. I would learn all the stuff that it can't do. And I learned more about that than I did exactly duplicating it.
Yeah.
So I could fool people. But I really knew, and all the stuff that what I really knew was all the stuff that it couldn't do was the hotspot of the power zone of the synthesizer.
Yeah.
So I mention that to people, but it's hard to convey. Like, if you really start doing it, you become so connected to your weaknesses that they sort of become strengths in a way, because they're really unique. They're the personality of who we are. And people, like, you can enjoy that. It's better than just everyone impressing everybody with the same level, like, perception of excellence, that perfect tone or something.
Yeah, there is none.
There really isn't.
No.
At music school, you kind of keep striving for the instrumentalists, this endless pursuit of the perfect tone. But you've discovered that the perfect tone is sort of the subtle changes that occur, and the correct, like you said. I love how you described it, the corrections.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how I'm so honored to be here talking to you, because the way you think and the way you act is so exceptional. Like, I feel like I can walk away from this conversation not just inspired, but like always having this feeling that I'm having now about creativity and following.
Me too. Talking to you, I mean, it's the same. People who are inspired inspire others.
Well, thank you. I mean, I've looked up to you for a long time, and I heard about you all the way back in the 70s.
That's because I'm older.
And I will be, and I want to pass it on too. And you're not really. You're timeless.
Well, I'm an agent. And, all the people here, you say I write for all these loudspeakers, but it's the team.
It is a team.
I couldn't do it without,
I couldn't do it without my team. And music,
Fernando and all these people. Chris, who succeeded me, Chris Chafe, who's the director now, he's put together, we have a faculty now with a PhD in computer science, 2 or 3 composers, with doctoral degrees, an electrical engineer, PhD, double E, a neuroscientist. I mean, we have what the AI lab had in miniature, but we have this interdisciplinary, and then people like Matt, whom you now know and understand his value.
Absolutely.
PhD. This is a really rich environment, sort of what I dreamed of when we first started work, and having multiple disciplines like the original AI lab.
These names will be in the description, so you can all follow along. I mean, I really want to come back here and hear the music.
Yeah.
Because what's going on here is something a little bit different from the pop music field and from the Hollywood music field. But I think it's going to be well worth your, a little bit of effort to listen to some of this music and to be patient and see what's going on, because this is the type of thinking that got us here, that got this stuff to all of you, the sounds that you're using in dance music and just in your songs in general, and that are on your plug-in synthesizers. So seeing what's going on here is, I think, what we're going towards, and it will inspire you. And hopefully some of you can just, any amount of the inspiration that you get from John about following your heart, following your ear, and never stopping, and getting the sense, intuitive sense of where the action is, If it's not in your field of influence, look what he did. He went over to the other side, and he really wasn't well-versed in computers. He was just well-versed in traditional music. And look what happened. It opened up this exponential realm of possibilities, and attracted people, attracted students, attracted Yamaha, a corporation that doesn't, Yamaha doesn't just move very quickly. They have to really see something. And this was a gigantic discovery, and it changed the face of music. So, I catch my breath. So happy to be here and pass this along to others. And for me, I'm going to have to do some soul searching here to get myself in front of a coding machine and discover some of these things myself. What I'm preaching here.
Yeah.
Do it.
How many times in my work I get up early and work on my computer, programming for some musical problem, and I keep saying, I get discouraged, can't find a solution. I keep saying, don't give up, keep going. Then I go for a walk and come back and things clarify a bit. And maybe sometimes tough ones, it's days later, I find a solution. But I keep saying, don't give up.
And that's testimonial to your whole life.
Yeah.
And it's ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Beautiful. This is like a life changer. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more. Hope you can like and subscribe after hearing something like this. I can't stop this journey. This is the highlight for me. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Tony. Great pleasure.
My pleasure so much.
Our pleasure.
Our pleasure. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.